If you do want to follow along, I have some advice for you. Whip out your laptops, and if you just want me to get up and show you the demo, we can do that as well. This is the first round of attempting to record the demo, and this is something that ultimately is going to turn into little 15-minute videos that have different steps about how to do various things. So I think we could call this the pilot today. I guess introduction. I'm Paul Evans. I'm the, what is my official title? Digital Humanities Center postdoc in Digital Humanities? Something like that. It's too long to fit on the business card. It has to be truncated. What does that mean? It means I wear a lot of hats, both, I guess I'd say academically and administratively. And so depending on who I'm talking to, what I say I am or do is very, very different. To some people, I'm a medieval legal historian. But I spent 22 odd years in the computer industry, and my approach to medieval legal texts is very much driven by computer analysis of statistical patterns in those texts. So I'm a historian in the English department because my work is so textually oriented, and my approach to texts is a very, I treat texts as an object of computation, if you want to call it that way. Every year for the last couple of years, I have taught a digital humanities class, mostly for English majors, but we've had people from history and ethnic studies. And one of the assignments I do every year with these students is I teach people the basics of making a web page. I got this assignment from Miriam Posner at UCLA, and Adam Hammond at San Diego State also does a similar assignment. He calls his version of it ugly 90s web pages. Now, since most of our students, at least based on my first year writing class, were all born around 1998, 99, they have no direct firsthand memory of ugly 90s web pages. So they're out there. They're definitely out there. So for those of you who don't remember these things firsthand, they used to really be everywhere, and yes, they were really, really ugly. But there was great things you could do about learning. Everybody could learn from everybody else's website, and I've tried to recapture a little bit of that. The assignment I do, and this again came from the example of UCLA, was a self-introduction web page. And the first time I did the assignment, I offered students the option. I said, for privacy reasons, you may not want to introduce your real self. You may want to introduce a fictional self. And everybody embraced that and had so much fun with that idea. We've never even bothered with introducing real selves ever since then. This is the demo that I do for students each year, and he's acquired more and more personality. My students very rapidly find out I like manatees, and pretty soon our manatee acquired sort of this whole personality that he was digital humanity, and all the features of the assignment are here, which is that I want students to introduce a fictional self, and CQ gives us his key biographical information, his name, where he lives, that he hangs out at the power plant with the other manatees. In Florida, when the weather's cold, he likes to eat lettuce. We have a picture, and it's just a basic introduction to this character. Key technical points. The students are required to change font face and size. They are required to change font color. They're required to have an image, and they're required to link to some external website. So you see all, it's very simplistic, but you see all the features of the assignment are here, the required elements. Here's two examples of actual student assignments in response to this. Another, I guess I would say, character that became kind of part of the fabric of the class or the culture of the class was we had one student who was really, really into parks and recreation. And so she did a Leslie Knope intro, and Lil Sebastian became kind of a feature of the class, or a sort of de facto mascot. Here was so Emily Beazold, who's a student who graduated last year and now is in a master's program at Georgetown. Here was her assignment, and it was the dragon. I am the dragon. But again, you have the image, you have changing font size and face and color, and external links, and again, all of the features of the assignment, and even some really strange color choices. She's pointing out to you that she's making some really, really odd color choices. Again, this is really very much in the spirit of bad 90s web pages. I mean, in 1996, the web was just awash in stuff like this. And
they took forever to load.
Yeah, well, that was not the fault of the web page. That was the fault of inferior bandwidth in those days. But one of the ways that the web spread as rapidly as it did was early web browsers, and web browsers to this day have this interesting feature. And we'll go back to our manatee. And this is a little different depending on which browser you use, but it doesn't matter if you're using Firefox, Safari, Chrome, they all have this feature. You have a way of saying, what does the underlying code look like? Okay? And in the days of early, ugly 90s web pages, the code was very understandable. And if you saw something you liked on a web page and you said, how did they do that? You could, you were 2 button clicks away from seeing exactly how they did that. Okay? This isn't as useful as it once was. And if you have any doubts about this, I would urge you to just go to the top level USD web page and do view source. For a lot of reasons, the code is mostly because it's automatically generated by a program and not handwritten by a human anymore. It's extremely messy, and it's not as informative as it used to be. But for my students who are doing the assignments, I'm kind of intentionally taking them back to a time when this was really a great way to learn how to do it. One of the things that we have that's always a preliminary problem, how many Mac people and how many PC people? Who's a Mac person? That's most everybody. And you guys are PC people? I wouldn't necessarily have the best or most current advice for the PC folks, but one of the first questions you've got to ask yourself is, how am I going to create that code? What text editor are you going to use? Now, I'm personally very, very old school. I used a text editor called VI that I've used every day since 1982. So I do not recommend that if you do not know VI already, I do not recommend that you go out and learn it. I had a good text editor called Text Wrangler that I used with the students last year, and the company that produced that has taken it out of circulation in favor of the paid version. So I'm kind of struggling with what I'm going to use with the students this year, and you're going to see one answer to that today. You can, as a Mac person, you can use TextEdit. Now, how many of you have used TextEdit? Okay, how about you guys? You ever use TextEdit? if you go to the little magnifying glass at the top, you can type in text edit and it will pop it up for you. Text edit has problems. You have to make sure you're using it in plain text mode and not rich text mode. And you really, really have to make sure it doesn't try to put in smart quotes. That is the typographically correct quotes where the one on the left side is typographically distinct from the one on the right side. You're going to be using quotes in this stuff all the time. And it really will not understand it unless they are, it's the basic quote that you get in the most basic character set. Do people understand what I mean when I say ASCII? Does that sound familiar? ASCII is just a word for the most basic 127 character set that you get on a keyboard. Okay? Pretty much all computing in 1982 worked on, you got 127 characters you could use and that was it. And of course, as the web has expanded and typographical demands and demands for multi-language support have expanded, we get a much wider range of characters we can use. But under the hood, a surprising amount of this depends on you getting it down to that 127 character set. Okay, I'm going to do the demo in a text editor called Atom. This is one that I'm experimenting with 3 or 4 to make a decision about what I'm going to use in class in the spring. But this is the one that I'm going to use. Come on. We'll call this live because I'm doing it live. Oh, well. Sorry, I thought it was going to give me the. The file has to have the extension .html. If you're on a PC, on a Windows machine, it's going to want it to be .htm. Okay? And here's a fundamental principle of HTML. This is true of HTML. This is true of XML. This is true of anything that is based on these things, like TEI. XML and HTML documents are what's called tree structured. What does that mean to non-computer science people? You know those Russian nesting dolls? Okay, there's one inside the other, inside the other, inside the other. It's like that. Every doll, one doll isn't halfway inside the other. It's got to be all the way inside. Now, in this model, you can open up a container and there may be any number of things in there. But everything is wholly contained inside something else. Okay? In good HTML, and I'm not saying that all the HTML you see is good, every container is marked by a beginning and an end. Okay? We're going to see a few evolutionary vestiges where that doesn't quite happen, but whenever you start a container, you should make sure you know where the end of that container is too. And for an HTML document, it's HTML. Everything is always inside those angle brackets, okay? And the other thing that you will see is you will see a slash. So what I've done here is, here's a container that's going to contain HTML code, and I've shown a start, and that slash indicates, okay, that's the end. It knows to look up to the top and say, oh, it's the end of that thing, right? We can put hundreds, thousands of lines in between there, but it will know that that's a beginning and an end of a container. Every HTML document has a head and a body. And again, we Ah, thank you. I should have left that in and seen what it did with that.
Everything malfunction.
No, let's see. I'll put it back in. Well, it didn't object. That's interesting. I would think it would have objected to that. Now again, and this is the idea of things have to be wholly inside other things. And I will, an aside for the English academics of you, think about this. In an XML document representing a book, you have a natural hierarchy of here's a chapter and here's a section and whatever, but those things don't map to pages. How do you handle that? And you cannot have, here's a section of a book, but here's a page, it's like the last part of the section. You have, you can't have like page start, page end, right? And so in things like XML TEIP5, the page, this is the thing where they'll only give the page start marker because you can't have things one inside the other. We now have something that is, I'll say it's extremely simplistic, but this is a web page. Now, if we actually go out and look at it, okay, so here, this is this file we're working on. If we actually go look at this thing, there's nothing in it. There's no content. But we can tell that it's seeing. We know we're in the right place because we can do view source, and there it all is. Okay? We'll keep that up. Now, head includes what in some contexts might be called metadata information. The one really obvious thing that head includes is the title. And what title is, let's see if I can spell correctly. It didn't work the way I thought it was going to. Okay, well, we'll come back to that. What this is supposed to do is show up in the browser tab up here. So I'm not sure why it didn't, and I'll have to do that. But that is that's a place where, yeah, I don't know why that didn't work. Okay, well, we'll bypass for the moment. But this is just a little piece of text that goes up at the top of the browser tab. So if you want people to have that, that's where that goes. Bodies where things really happen, and you can have any number of textual elements in body. You can have headers, and you have 6 levels of headers. Now again, we have a start and a finish, okay? And so there's H1 through H6. H1 is the biggest one. You can have header 2 is smaller header. You can probably go down to, as a practical matter, H3. At some point, they start to get ridiculous, and I would claim after H3, they do get ridiculous. You wind up, in fact, I'll show you, H6. It's far smaller than the text in the main body of the thing, and looks pretty goofy. Now let's go back there. Don't need that. Don't need that. Okay, and here you see a whole range of these things. They just the main thing that they have in common and what makes them headers is that they're the text is bolded, and you can make them really quite small eventually. Again, I wouldn't suggest going past. I would not go past 8.3. By the way, you notice our tab message did show up this time, so the text I wrote up there is now present.
I'm wondering, since I don't know, where the audience is coming from in terms of their knowledge of websites, if you could talk about what HTML is, even kind of define it for us, and since it's a language, when we use it, who are we talking to?
You're talking to the web browser.
And HTML stands for?
Hypertext Markup Language. And so, and the hypertext emphasizes the feature of a web page that web pages almost invariably link to other web pages. And so you can, if you've ever had this experience of looking up something in Wikipedia and then you kind of click through, oh, this is interesting and this is interesting, and you kind of wander around, eventually you wind up in some place that had nothing to do with anything you were starting out looking for. That's the hypertext idea in action there. It is a way of transiting information in a nonlinear front to back of a book idea. But you raise a good point here. Who is this addressed to? It's addressed to your web browser. The text is a code which tells the web browser to render a representation of that text. And so you can get, and this is less the case than it used to be, but different web browsers can render the same HTML differently. So if you've looked at something in Safari and then you look at something in Chrome, it doesn't have to be the same. Those differences aren't as pronounced as they were even 10 or 15 years ago, but they're there. It is a directive to do that. But the thing that I'm showing you is, in effect, what the language is. And the point of the demo is to kind of go back and forth between, I'm going to do this, and then you're going to see that, and what the pieces of the document are.
So it's a language that allows you essentially to visualize things.
Yes.
On the internet by communicating with the browser and telling it what you want to see.
Yes. And I guess it might help to explain what there was before, in the before times. Well, okay. When people nowadays talk about the internet, I think people talk about that as being kind of one and the same thing as, what you get when you type www.something.com or .edu into your browser. And that's not what the internet has always been. Ways in which information was, transmitted, used to be transmitted. And I'll go back to, the beginning of my career in the field, let's say the mid-'80s, but it was extremely common for you to download files from a remote site and do whatever you were going to do with them, including view them, okay? There was no PDF in those days, but there was something called PostScript, which was, I think, conceptually similar to that. So maybe you wanted to read a document. So you knew that it was at a certain place, and you would FTP, File Transfer Protocol, and you would go grab this document, download it onto your machine, and if it was a PostScript file, you'd print it out, read it. There came to be, as time went on, PostScript viewers that would show you this PostScript file. And again, you can think of that as kind of like PDF. a document format that you could download and view. But things like, well, I'm trying to remember if it even was JPEG back then, but I'll say early image formats. You had to have a PostScript viewer, and you had to have a viewer for every single one of these formats. There was like a different viewer for JPEGs, or I mean, somebody remind me what some of the other formats were. I think they really were early JPEGs, but you didn't have it all in one package. Like if you wanted to look at the text, you'd look at one thing, and if you wanted to look at the pictures, you'd look at something else. And this was a way of, you didn't have to roll your own viewing of the material. It combined the downloading and the viewing all in one experience. So, it does, you are able to treat it as a pretty normal system for delivering text. Like if you, I don't know, imagine a paper you write in class. Okay, you guys are students. When you write a paper, what do you use?
Google Docs.
What? Google Docs?
Yeah.
Okay, and I heard Word? Okay, and those are, what? Oh, yeah, I haven't used that one, but okay, so there's several choices, but the medium is pretty similar. You might have a title for your paper, you have paragraphs, you might have little headers. Well, we've already shown you how to do the headers, and there's a paragraph mechanism, conceptually quite similar. And you can have lots and lots of text of, that sort. Again, start end tag. To save time, there's a previewer inside this. So I can do this fast preview that way. But see, there you go, we have a paragraph. And you can imagine text like that extending anywhere, as long as you want. Now, it gets more interesting when we include images. And with images, we have to specify where, we have to declare that we're inserting an image here, and we have to specify the file that the image is to be found in, because the file, that's always going to be an external file. And here's where our manatee comes in. And note that this is one where, and this is a throwback to very early days of HTML, but there's an end tag. It's not ideal, but that's the way it is. And so now we have, text and an image, and it is that simple to throw in images, and you can throw in as many as you want. There are more sophisticated things we can do to control the placement of the image on the page, which I'll get into if we have time. Sometimes students like to center it up, and we have a way of doing that. But let's put more text here. So I want to talk about styling text.
I downloaded Adam and I'm following along.
Okay. Okay.
I got a little lost in how to insert a picture.
Well, you have to have a picture. So make sure you download a picture and make sure it's in the same folder that you're in right now.
Really?
Yeah.
Somewhere else on my computer?
Well, you're gonna have to figure out where it is.
Okay.
Right? It could be in your downloads folder, or it could be. But you just got to make sure. See, in this case, for this demo, I have the manatee image right in the same folder here. Okay, and that's why I'm able to do this.
Okay.
If it isn't in the same folder, you have to give what's called a full path name for that,
Okay.
and that can be,
Just go in there.
Yeah.
Alright.
So the for the moment, and you should consider this very much a temporary thing I'm doing, because I'm going to show you a better way to do this in a minute. But you can, and let me, probably going to be easier just to grab this. What I'm doing here, okay. What I'm doing here is I'm telling it I want to change the font face. In other words, we get this very, it's a kind of Times Roman sort of thing, and it's default font, not very attractive in some settings. And here, I'm using, and this is it's called Andale Mono, something like that. This is a standard font that you get on the Mac. So if you are a Mac person, you have this font already. This is actually not a good way to go. You shouldn't really depend on the fonts that are on your system. There are traditionally only 14 fonts that are guaranteed to work on every single. It doesn't matter if you're on Windows, Mac, Linux. There's this 14, and it was this list that was established by Microsoft in 1995, and we've been dealing with it ever since. This is a bad thing, and of course, every year my students get very ambitious to try out all kinds of bizarre fonts, and it was very funny. Last year, I taught the class in that room, and if you look in that room, there's two tables, and within a week, no more than 2 weeks, the students had segregated themselves into, there were some students who were always at the table on the right, and there were some students who were always at the table on the left. And at the end of 2 weeks, I figured out that the segregation was all the PC people had segregated to one table, and all the Mac people had segregated to the other table, and then they were whispering advice to each other because that was a convenient way for them to work. So I would get students who would submit, they had these wonderful font choices that worked great on their machine, and they'd submit it to me for grading, and then I'd get something that looked like that first font. We have better ways of dealing with this now, is you can get fonts that download on the fly from Google. It will work no matter, it doesn't matter what you're on. Your browser will do the right thing. And so that's the change that I'm doing for the assignment this year, is the students will pick their fonts from the Google selection, and therefore I'll see it exactly as they intend. So let's.
So I inputted a picture. It's .png. Is that okay? Or is that
Yeah,
okay.
that'll work.
And then the color of my /p closing my paragraph went to orange because of red. So I don't know if that means there's an inherent error.
That's.
And then I don't know how to preview what I've done.
Without installing an extra thing, you're not going to preview it. So you're just going to jump in with your browser and do it that way.
And what do I do with my browser to preview it? Just input.
Do file open, and then you'll just navigate through your files, because you can open a file, not just a URL location.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes. So I save it to my desktop and I'll open it with Google Chrome.
Yeah.
Or Internet Explorer.
You should, and then you should be able to see it. Okay. So we can do other things. We can do is this is our opportunity to change our colors. So here's an example of, let's say I want to make a paragraph, paragraph text gray, right? This isn't going to necessarily change all my paragraph text to gray, but let's say I want to make this particular paragraph gray. I name it here. And hopefully, okay, see, the paragraph text has changed colors now. Maybe that isn't so obvious. We can be more extreme, and you'll get the result. You see, so you can change the color however you want there. Now, sorry. As I said, this is an older practice, and it's very much disapproved of to now put your, I guess what I would call your formatting information in the file with your text. And the idea is that the text and the representation should be kept separate from each other as much as possible. And so what we do instead, and I'll copy this information for the moment, is we create a file. In this case, we'll call it live. Oh, no, that's, sorry. Okay. So we call it something.css. Okay, you can name it whatever you want. And then when we go back to our we don't need any of this information. Let's see if I can do this off the top of my head. And hopefully, if I did that correctly, what that means is I've included that file about the styling information into this one. And then it's like any change you make to your styling information, you're not messing with the content here. So if I did that correctly, we can take a look again, and the paragraph text will still be pink. So let's see how we...
Paul, do you want to explain what a cascading style sheet is? I mean, you kind of already, you just demonstrated it for us.
Yeah. So let's make sure it worked. I'm going to say that's a yes. Yes, CSS, okay. As Amanda said, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet, but again, this is this idea that you are separating as much as possible the content of the file from the directives concerning how it is to be represented. And the cascading just has to do with the idea that you could have CSS files can reference other CSS files, and there's no requirement that it all be in the same place. You can each I could include any number of CSS files in this. Oh yeah, like you can get them from other people or other sources, and then you can do your own on top of that to modify what you've gotten from other people. At the moment, I'm doing a project that involves representing TEI P5 texts of Gratian's Decretum, and there's a certain amount of CSS that I've inherited from some other project, and then I have an additional CSS that's mine in particular to this project. Those CSS style sheets can in turn include others. This kind of link directive can show up in those. So you can, and when I say that looking at the source of a contemporary web page is a lot more confusing than it used to be. A great deal of it has to do with this, both the CSS and the inclusions of multiple layers of CSS. That all of this is visible to your browser. It has to be, because all of this, as we said earlier, is a language for telling your browser how to render a certain body of text. How are we doing here? So here we wind up going we wind up going outside to get the CSS file included in, and so now we're sort of back in the good graces of what people consider to be good contemporary practice here. I think we've agreed that the really tiny header doesn't add anything. So now we're actually pretty far along. We've done many of the things that the student assignment typically includes. We've changed the font face. We've changed its size. We've changed the font color. We have included an image. And so I think the remaining things I'll show little niceties like how how we use the Google fonts, and then the for example, centering up the image. So are there any questions at this point?
You mentioned the 14 fonts that are sort of
Yes.
approved for universal use.
Yes.
There's a font that I use a lot that's used in earlier English work because it has all
Mhm.
the extinct letters that
Yeah.
we need to use. And it's based on Unicode. It's called Junicode. I'm wondering if something that's based on Unicode and that close to Unicode is going to function as universal. Or
Short answer, you can't assume that.
okay.
And there's like multiple places you can get into trouble with these issues.
Okay, maybe that's a very particular thing. You and I.
Well, I think there's I think there's a bigger issue here, and which is this issue for scholarly work. We do not want to be limited to our 127 ASCII characters. For a lot of the things I'm doing, I mean, you English department people, I mean, you want your Thorn and your, you want that character set for sure. And for a lot of the things I'm doing, I want a lot of the medieval abbreviations, the medieval Latin abbreviations. You have to have a character set that supports those things. And I know for a while there was a thing called Medieval Unicode Initiative that tried to do this for medieval codes. And so for each of your academic areas, I can almost guarantee you there's somebody doing something in whatever your academic area is to provide the specialized Unicode support you need. The other issue is browser rendering, which can be iffy even if the font supports it. And I think some of these, I'm going to say some of these Google fonts probably do, but you really have to go looking around in there.
Is there a way you can test it?
What?
Is there a good way you can test it? Like,
Yeah, well,
for
with,
instance-
go to fonts.google.com, and they give you the ability to like just cut and paste some text into it, and they'll show you how it renders in a certain font.
Okay.
And that would be a good test.
If Google Docs preserves it, is that a good indicator that you're?
That's your
sort of
odds
safe?
are pretty good. Well, that tells you that there's some font that has.
Google Docs didn't have to convert it to.
Right. It's one of their supported fonts does it. Now, occasionally you'll get things where they'll do this silent fallback, and the odd character is not quite in the same font as the rest of your stuff.
Sure.
It's just in one that's close.
Yeah.
And people with a good eye can catch that.
Right.
So let's do rather than, I'll say, redo all of the, kind of just do this by hand in front of you, I'll point out this is the set of rules that I have for the demo that I do for my students. And we'll include it in what I've been doing with you so far so you can see how it works. But things that you have seen already or you could guess at. In the demo I've given you so far, the headers are all on the left. And we may want our headers to be centered, especially our H1. So here I'm saying, okay, H1s are automatically centered. Like the paragraphs, the headers can be, you can change the colors. And in this case, I only have one H2 header, and I have just said, well, all H2 headers are gray. Abe didn't see that the demo is an assignment I do in English 494 where people have to introduce themselves, and everybody, I don't know, the whole time I've been doing the class, everybody has embraced the option of introducing a fictional self. So my demo is this manatee, and hence that's why gray is everywhere. It's not because it's boring. It's because it's a manatee. So you'll see it in a minute. But that's why these two are gray. Notice that if we have multiple directives, you just separate them with a semicolon, right? So we're including both color and alignment. We separate it with a semicolon. H1 only has the alignment directive, and the paragraph colors, the specialized paragraph colors, only have the color directive. But you can have 30 of these things, right? There's nothing to prevent you from having 30 of them. This was, this image center was a thing that came, students asked me last year, well, I want to center my image. And it was actually a surprising amount of work for me to find a way for them to do that. But that did turn out to be the right and simplest answer. So here's a case where this is a more full example of a cascading style sheet, but I've established my fonts, and I established both, I'll say, position and color and size of the different elements that I'm using. And so let's go to our live demo and swap in that style sheet and look at how it changes. Okay, so what we've done is we've centered up header 1, header 2. Header 2 is now gray. Header 3, I didn't do anything with that. And so that's still over on the left. We now have, and it may be not real visually distinct, but we have a different font. And this is one that we're getting from Google. So no matter whether you view this on a Linux machine or a Windows machine or a Mac, you will get exactly the same font. There isn't this problem that my students had if they intended one thing and I see something else. Okay? I guess that about covers the demo as I do it with the students. This typically takes it a little longer when I'm doing it with them because every step along the way somebody has a problem and then I run and fix it. So just me doing it goes faster, but.
So I want you to talk a little bit about the reasons why you do this with students. So, I'm not questioning it.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I just want to hear you just talk about, we live in this world where most of the time, if students are going to do web offering, they're going to use not this, they're going to use a content management system. Like WordPress or Drupal or something like that. And they're going to use, like having some HTML knowledge is going to help them with that, but most of them are pretty WYSIWYGs, so like you don't need this stuff. And so you kind of mentioned at the very beginning of your presentation that if you go to view code, for example, on a lot of websites, it's so messy and it's so over complicated in a lot of ways, because machines are authoring it. So I don't know if that's one of the things you're going to talk about, but I'm just sort of curious as to what literacies are you teaching
Okay.
to your students?
I've got a whole range of motivations for doing this. The most immediate and practical is when you, and the reason I brought up the CSS here is when I do the scalar unit with students, the way scalar works is you can, if you want to do anything but accept scalar's default styling, you have to produce exactly this kind of code and shove it into one particular window in the scalar system. And so I want them to have this experience of getting a sense of both what CSS can do and what it looks like and how to find out more if they need to. So the immediate practical classroom payoff is if they've done this, then when they get the scalar, they can make the changes in appearance that they want and they won't panic.
Could you explain a little bit for folks who might not know what scalar is and why you engage with it with your students?
Scalar is a platform for, and it'd probably be easier just to log in and show it too. This is a platform for scholarly publishing, online scholarly publishing, and I think this is a great thing to be teaching because it is, sorry, I just can't talk and log in at the same time. Yeah, I do this. I do this a lot with students, and it is an alternative to. This is an alternative to, I guess, Microsoft Office as the dominant platform for you're going to produce some kind of scholarly content. This is an example of a project I did. This was like a paper I did when I was in my master's program at Yale, and I turned it into a scalar book as a demo for my students. But it has a lot of the affordances of a paper, if you want to think of it that way. But it has, for example, you have footnotes. But things that I like about this are the page is an artificial unit. Okay, it interrupts your reading when you turn a page. Here, the page, if you want to think of it that way, can be as long as the coherent thought that you're trying to get across, which might be, I don't know, 4 pages. You might not hold people's attention for one thought that long, but let's say a 3-page chunk, right? And here you get that natural division. Okay. In keeping with the hypertext idea, you do not have to have, you don't have to go through it linearly. And to give you an example of where that's practical for many of the things I work on, I have 2 entirely different audiences. I have medievalists who know very, very little about I'll say the more statistical or computational techniques that I'm using. And they have to be brought up to speed on that stuff that would be wasted on other people, and vice versa. The medievalists get very annoyed when I tell the digital humanities people this stuff is written in Latin, and so you are able to provide different paths through the material depending on the audience. And you can say, hey, if you're in this category, you start here on this trail. If you're in this category, you start here on that trail. It has great integration with images. You can do integration with video, audio. It's very multimedia friendly. And so it's just really a great way to talk to students about, breaking them out of the Microsoft Word paradigm for producing some kind of scholarly product.
And so we're teaching them a bit of code,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're interacting with Scalar. They want to do something that maybe Scalar hadn't thought of. Is there a way that the students can kind of hack
Scalar is not at the moment
Okay.
easily hackable.
Okay.
I'll put it that way. Although again, this does get back to one of the things that I think is relevant about teaching people HTML. I don't know how many people know this. If you're a USD student, you can set yourself up with no external help, any intervention, anything. You can set yourself up a raw HTML website in under 5 minutes. You just have to know that that's there, and I always walk them through that process. But when people know how to write this code, frequently the things they want to do for themselves, it may be easier for them to do that for themselves than to depend on some other platform to do it. Maybe they just want fonts or colors or something that isn't available to them otherwise. And having that ability, puts that in reach. I mean, I think there's a surprising amount you can do with very, very simple HTML, and for many things that's actually a pretty appropriate solution to some problems.
Yeah, a simile, I guess, or metaphor that I've used in talking with students who are sort of like, why do I have to know this? When I can just do WordPress or whatever. It's sort of like the difference between driving an automatic and driving a manual transmission car. If you drive a manual transmission car, you know how a car works.
Yeah.
If you drive an automatic, it's like, you don't need to know that.
Well, I certainly...
I've always really relished knowing how to drive a manual transmission car, and not just because it costs me half as much to rent a car in Europe. So you have a much greater depth of understanding about how these things function.
To me, that's
you
what...
interact with them differently.
That's, I mean, as I said, I have an immediate practical thing I'm trying to get across. I'm trying to get them up to speed for that scalar unit. And there is a certain window on Scalar where they got to paste this stuff in, and I want them ready for it, so this is how I get them there. But I think many students don't have a coding experience, or they don't have a good coding experience. They certainly didn't have one that left them, I don't know, feeling good about being able to do something they wanted to do, as opposed to some bizarre artificial problem that was set before them, maybe. And it's a great way to provide that experience with relatively low, it's not a steep learning curve. I mean, this is not like learning Java or something. They're going to be able to do some simple things in the first hour that they're using this, that's got a visual payoff. And visual payoff is always a win. It's like, oh, I did this, and now the font is pink, right? I don't know, what it takes to get people to feel like they've got some control over what's going on in their computer instead of what's going on in their computer controlling them is, I mean, that's a big issue in our society. It really is, and there's more you can do to control it than, relatively easily than people go around being aware of. So it's a first foot in the door. I frankly think we could and should be teaching humanities students programming, like real, honest-to-God programming, but I think there's a hurdle we have to get across of people thinking, I'm not the programming type, or I'm not a math person. Well,
I'm not good at math.
what? Yeah, you do hear that. It's like, well,
But you are good at language.
yeah, this is,
Yeah.
it is,
So
yeah.
call it something else,
It-
and you can do it.
Surprisingly,
Because framing makes an enormous difference with students who, for whatever reason, think they're not good at math, right? So if you frame it as a different sort of activity, they'll surprise themselves.
but I mean, when I first came to that world, and so let's say between my first computer experiences were between about 1978 and 1982, and then especially when I started to do a lot of C programming around, I guess, 1984, it really shocked me, because if you're an outsider, even an outsider in 1978, you have the vision that computers are all about numbers. They are about calculating, they're making numerical calculations. It's like, well, what do you, if you had asked me in 1978, what do you do with a computer? Well, you calculate the trajectory from the Earth to the Moon, right? That's a numerical calculation. And it was a big culture shock for me when I actually started doing a lot of work in C, where almost nothing you're doing is about that. And a lot of it is very much, well, you're matching this piece of text with that piece of text, or you're sorting this piece of text against that piece of text. And sometimes they're just little words, and there's all kinds of things that are going on, but it isn't very much about doing complex numerical calculations. It is a surprisingly text-oriented medium in a way that I think, English majors at least don't conceive it to be. I would love to get over that hurdle and show people, yes, you can really do this, one, and two, you can make it do things you're interested in, two. My long-term, I would like to see some sort of literary computing or humanities computing courses where you were doing Python or R to do a lot of textual stuff, and that would be a way of addressing that. For now, I find this to be a quite inexpensive and painless way to introduce students to the idea that they can exercise some kind of control or agency in this arena.
Answer questions?
Go ahead.
My CSS document is not showing up in Chrome, but my HTML is, and this is kind of fun.
That's what we're shooting for here. If we
Well done.
if there aren't oh hey, very good. I don't know if we don't have other, I guess, bigger picture questions. I can take a look at what's going on the screen
Sure.
and solve his problem. Did you have any questions for us, or?
I just wanted to know that CSS file, how do you implement that then into the HTML document?
It's this.
Say like p.green, you define that,
Oh.
and p.green means paragraph color green.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Right, but
So in your HTML document, you just put open angle p.green, close angle.
well, no. What I do is I have p dot pink. So here I go p class equals pink.
Yeah,
And it,
does that require the CSS or not?
yes, which we have included
Oh, I see.
up here. See, this imports all our CSS, so we can now pretend that it's in this file. But we have still not disobeyed the rule about separating content and representation.
Yeah, because your class equals pink, that pink could have not only defined the color, but a font face and like that.
In this case, it's going. Yes, it could. It could. I could. I mean, I'm just calling it pink because that's convenient, because the only attribute I'm playing with there is color.
Sure.
But I could say, class equals, fill in the blank with any nonsense word you want, and that could represent 15 different things,
Sure.
right? I mean, it's not, and I don't have, you only put one of these things in here. I don't do class equals this, that, the other, right? There's just the one thing, and that will subsume any attribute. As, for example, with big header, or no, let's do H2, small header. That had two attributes. That had the attribute of a color change to gray, and it had the attribute of being centered.
Right.
And so I didn't have to do the class there because I was applying that to all the H2s. But let's say there were some H2s that I didn't want to do that. You do that class equals some name, just the same there. Okay? And this is what references everything that you might associate with that in the CSS file.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Okay? Okay. Do we have anything else? Oh, okay. I will try to catch up with you in about 20 minutes or so,
Great.
and then let's take a look at what you've got. You want to come up here and we'll